All right. Should we be worried about Geno Smith in 2023? That and more this week on the couch. Warren Sharp. Oh, so much to get into, Warren. But let's start with something that might be counter to what a lot of people are looking forward to in Seattle. Should we be worried about Geno Smith this year?
Well, I don't know if worried is the right word, but we should have some questions about his performance from last year, because last season I was a little bit surprised when I went back and looked at just, how efficient this Seahawks passing attack was. We know that they dumped Russell Wilson, and we know there were good reasons for them to dump Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson was not playing very well for this team, and Russell Wilson was struggling, and I think Pete Carroll was fed up with him. But the reality is that when you look at the Seattle Seahawks passing attack last year, Russell Wilson averaged more EPA per attempt in his final year in Seattle, which was 2021, than did Geno Smith last season. And if you run down like the laundry list of statistics, Russ, in the year that was so bad, got him kicked out of Seattle, averaged more yards per attempt, threw fewer interceptions, better touchdown to interception ratio, higher touchdown rate, took fewer sacks, converted third downs at a higher rate. The list goes on and on and on. All of these things Russell Wilson was better at than was Geno Smith last season. And so Geno did have a great completion percentage. That was like one thing that obviously Geno did remarkably well. But at the end of the day, do I think Geno is playing better than Russell Wilson did when he left? I think the sort of the tape tells you that, but the stats tell you a little bit of a different story. I'm excited, though, for the Seahawks simply because some of the other teams in the NFC and some of the other teams in their own division are taking a step backwards. But it definitely does bear watching how efficient this offense is. And I think if they want to reach their peak, they obviously need JSN to come in and play really well, which I think he's very capable of doing. And secondly, I was a little bit surprised when you look at some of the big picture statistics, and I'm in the betting world a little bit, so I'm betting, longest rushing attempt from Kenneth Walker over each week almost for weeks. But the efficiency out of this run game was not there last season. And if they lean a little bit too much into that run game, and it's not as efficient as it needs to be, that might put a cap on this offense to an extent. But I still think that with the skills that they have at the receiving position, Geno is going to have a very good year. It's just I was surprised to see what he did compared to Russ when Russ was so bad he got him run out of town.
Yeah, I like that as something to lead off from. Of course, folks, if you don't know Warren Sharp Football, and the 2023 football preview, so rich. Really, the density of information is overwhelming in a good way. But also, what I love about what you do, Warren, through each team preview, all the paragraphs, all of the narrative, you use the analytics to tell a story. The analytics are not just a lens, and that's all you see. The analytics add depth and breadth to what we're watching. It's not watching football through the lens of analytics. It's using analytics to understand the whys of what we see. And I did think it was interesting. Also, you pointed out in that Seattle chapter that Geno did not do well under pressure. And the schedule this year is probably going to present teams that are a lot better at blitzing and getting pressure than the schedule he saw last year. And so I think these are things, what I like to talk about in fantasy football terms, Warren, is that first few weeks where we get the big reveal, and having our minds massaged and limber to be ready for the range of possibilities and know, like, oh, okay, if we watch the first few weeks and Geno struggles and there's more pressure dialed up against him, he wouldn't be the first quarterback to have a surprise resurgence year and then regress the next year because teams figured out, like you laid out, hey, it's not that difficult to figure out where he succeeded and where he failed, and as a defensive coordinator, how you should approach him. And that's one of the things I wanted to ask you, Warren. We're going to get into a lot of the specific stuff from the book, but I know, first of all, I guess I want to ask you, how did you end up at this way of watching football where you're very much informed by these advanced metrics, but always coming back to what's happening on the field? That's where the truth really lies.
Yeah, it's it basically, my love for football started when I was just watching the game with other people, my dad primarily, and he got so frustrated with outcomes and game results that he would get mad and storm out of the room, turn off the TV. I'm done with this game. I'm done with this team. And I think a lot of people that are casual fans are like that as well. And for me, it was always like, okay, well, why are they doing what they're doing? And then once I got my hands on the play-by-play data, I started digging into it more. I started sharing some of that data. I started writing more about it. But there's more than just data as you're trying to break down the game of football. There's, strategies, philosophies, roster building. There's so much that goes into it. And so when I really started to dig into, the analytics world, it came about by kind of this approach where, yes, I'm going to be informed by the data, but I'm going to try to understand why a team might or might not be doing something, and then what they could do differently based upon who they have on their roster, based upon their experience that they've had to date, based upon maybe some things from their coaching tree, or like limitations based upon their salary cap or their specific roster situation, and how it all plays together. Because there's so much more than just the simple statistic that plays into kind of why a team is doing what it's doing. And a lot of it is like coaching tree backgrounds. And so I focus a lot on coaching and optimal decision-making and strategies. And that's one of the things I think that got me noticed by some teams several years ago. And I've enjoyed doing some consulting work with some, whether it's teams or offensive coordinators in the past as well. And one of the things that I enjoy even sharing right now, and I'm really excited now, I'm going to be sharing a lot more this season on Sharp Football Analysis, because for the past several years, I've gone the route of writing for other websites, and that's always something that you want to try and you want to take that step and write for different people. But inevitably what ends up happening is they tell you what they want you to write about, and they tell you when they want you to write this. And so this year I'm doing something, and I've got my first article that's actually coming out this afternoon. I'm just going to write about whatever the hell I want to write on my own website this year. I've got a deep dive breakdown, and this is something up the fantasy football world alley coming out this afternoon, of something that separates the two best offenses in the NFL, and I don't think anybody's talking about it, the Kansas City Chiefs and the Buffalo Bills, and where the Buffalo Bills have struggled massively compared to expectation, and is down inside that 3-yard line, down at the goal line, what they need to do differently to actually score some touchdowns down there. And some of the statistics are relatively shocking, but I'm going to be getting back to my roots to an extent. It's what I really love doing, and that's like trying to share some of the analysis that I publish in this book in a different way with people on a more regular basis throughout the season, and writing when I want to write, writing when I have something to write about, whether it's analytics or betting or anything, as opposed to sticking to a schedule and being told like, this is what you have to write when you have to write it, and getting articles rejected because it's not betting focused enough for the place that I was working at. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, that is exciting. Warren, I think that's just a great tagline. Like if I read somewhere, someone said, I'm going to write out what I want to write about when I want to write about it. That sounds good. That sounds like a good thing for all of us. And you got a great fantasy section over there too, with Rich Rebar, Ray Summerlin, great people. Rich, many visits to the couch going back years. And I like how you tied it into watching football with Dad, right? And when I help explain to Dad what's going on, and again, like you said, you mentioned that Kansas City offense. One of the things I love that you point out is because you do a really good job of breaking down, well, here's the Achilles heel of this offense. This down, this personnel set. Here's the strength of this offense. Or when they're deciding to run on first down against light boxes, etc. And when you look at Kansas City's offense, it doesn't matter. They're man zone, whatever they throw at Kansas City, they remain elite. These are fun narratives that come out of the numbers, out of the analytics. And you mentioned decision-making coaching. I love talking about play callers. I love talking about decision-making. And I guess let's start on the negative side, because one of the things that gives me a lump in my throat when I think about Dallas, and as you point out, Dallas has a tremendous roster, is Mike McCarthy. And what's the potential landmine here. And again, I like the idea of let's look in the first few weeks. If we see it go this way, maybe we don't have to worry as much about McCarthy. If we see it go this way, same old Mike McCarthy, maybe we need to change expectations.
Yeah, I definitely have my concerns here. It seems like they built their roster, though, intelligently this offseason with some of the moves that they've made, whether it's Cooks or getting rid of Zeke, to operate a more pass-centric, opportunistic offense that's going to attack weaknesses of defenses, be a little bit more multiple, and allow them to be a little bit more creative, or let's say even getting back up to modern times of not having to rely on a running back just to call some run plays because he's getting paid a lot of money, even though it's very inefficient to utilize that strategy. But then you hear what Mike McCarthy actually says, and you wonder how much of that is derived from, ownership or Jerry Jones, or because we know Mike McCarthy basically will do whatever it takes to keep his job. That's why he got rid of Kellen Moore, even though the offense really wasn't a disaster problem. If he's like, we're passing the ball too much. Well, no, you're running the ball at a pretty high rate and very inefficiently. So there are some things that he says that don't make a lot of sense, that show me that he's desperate right now. And if things go sideways with this offense, and, I know Brian Schottenheimer, I don't know that he's going to have the influence over this offense that he might like to have, but he's certainly going to be heavily involved. And Mike McCarthy, for sure, is the one coming out here responsible for this offense. When you get rid of a guy like Kellen Moore, you're not going directly to Brian Schottenheimer and saying, okay, now he's the guy. Right. You're taking the ownership of the offensive side of the football. I would rather a coach do that than like what's happening up at Buffalo, where you have a defensive-minded head coach in Sean McDermott saying that I'm now going to be calling plays on the defensive side of the ball, because I do worry that seeps into the offense a little bit more than it should. Whereas in Dallas, at least it's the offensive-minded head coach who's taking over things on his side of the football. It's not really going to impact negatively like the defense too much. But I absolutely think that there's a situation where this thing does go a little bit sideways, but this is still, in my opinion, one of the best rosters, top to bottom. I worry that they don't have that security blanket at tight end. I wonder what's going to happen when Dak, if he is passing the ball and looking for that tight end on key situations, if that guy's not there, and where else he's going to have to go with the football. But in general, I think the Dallas Cowboys, thanks to their schedule, thanks to the division that they're in, thanks to the conference that they're in, are going to be in contention deep into the playoffs. It seems inevitable. There's a lot of question marks surrounding one of the best teams in the NFC in the San Francisco 49ers, just that I don't think they have a ton of depth. And I also worry about the number one position that they have in terms of Brock Purdy. So there's questions there. We obviously know that some of the other teams in that division, as well as around the NFC, have taken a little bit of a step back, and it's a much more thin much more thin conference than the AFC. As a result, I think Dallas is going to be in contention all the way to the very end. I think this is still going to be a very good team, but the question that I guess as fantasy players, you don't have to ask this question, but as in terms of Mike McCarthy's future, in terms of what Jerry Jones wants, in terms of where Cowboys fans are hoping that this team goes, you do have to ask this question, and that is, will there be anything that holds this team back that's an otherwise great team from reaching where they should be able to reach? Is there something that's going to come up from a play calling or decision-making perspective, which are two things that I don't really trust Mike McCarthy in, that's going to hold this team back or prevent them in a key game to – they lose this game, they miss out on the number one seed in a first-round bye. And as a result, they have to play an extra playoff game. And then they have to go on the road. And then they end up losing a game that they might not otherwise have needed to lose because of some random thing that happened during the season that Mike McCarthy screwed them on. Right. So that's definitely could end up coming back to come back to roost with regard to Mike McCarthy's poor decision-making. So I do have actual questions about what this team's going to do on a play-to-play basis, on a strategic basis. I think they are utilizing a bit more 11 personnel this far in preseason. I'm tracking some of the personnel grouping usage in preseason. One game is not indicative. Let's see 2 to 3 games, but some people want to take very, very little out of the preseason. That is one thing that I think is very useful to come out of the preseason, and that is personnel groupings. And it's not because teams are playing all of their starters, but if a team wants to, I tweeted out something about the Ravens earlier today. If a team wants to end up using a lot more 11 personnel, well, then they have to get and figure out who that number 4, 5, 6 wide receiver is going to be to make the roster. If they didn't use very much 11 personnel, which the Ravens use the least of it in the NFL, they're going to use a lot more 11 personnel in the preseason if they're planning on using a lot of 11 personnel during the season to just test out the depth of their position group. And so I do like to look at which teams are pivoting more to 12 and getting that second tight end on the field more frequently, even in the preseason, even if the starters aren't playing all that much, just because it shows that they're probably going to be utilizing this more during the season. And the Cowboys have started to utilize a little bit more 11 personnel than they did last year. So far this preseason. So I'm excited to see what some of those changes are going to be. I know that Brian Schottenheimer, he got in trouble in Seattle when he was getting Russell Wilson to throw the ball a little bit more. But there was that season that they started off where they pivoted and they got buy-in from Pete, and it was Russ and Shotty, and they convinced Pete, we want to throw the ball a lot here. And they came out, started throwing the football. While they were winning, it was great. As soon as that went sideways, the coach pulled the reins in. And, will that happen here in Dallas, or will Brian Schottenheimer never be given the opportunity to really convince Mike McCarthy that we should go really pass heavy? That's kind of, I still have a lot of questions, and those types of questions aren't really going to be answered in preseason. I don't really look at first down run rate and psycho overanalyze that in preseason, because I do think that's not something you could take away. Personnel grouping usage, how much your offensive line, if your starters are playing, are allowing pressure. There's a few different things that I take out from preseason, not specifically play call strategy, though.
Yeah, I think that I like how you lay out somewhere along the line when you said, is some Mike McCarthy decision going to come back to haunt the Cowboys? Packers fans everywhere are nodding. They already know the answer to that. They've lived that. Underachieving, a team not getting to the heights maybe that it could. And we have a merry-go-round of offensive coordinators. And I think with Mike McCarthy and some of the things you lay out, Mike McCarthy's history as a play caller, and we want one of the terms I put out there is the assumption of rational coaching. We get in trouble in fantasy football because we assume coaches are going to do what's rational. And what I like, Warren, in your own voice, I feel you wrestling with these things. You're watching the team, you're looking at it through the lens of these personnel groupings or in these situations, and then you're seeing how can the team not see this? How can the team, but yet these guys don't change, right? I think it was Maya Angelou, like when people show you who they are, believe them the first time, right? Like Joe Lombardi. I think the chapter on the Chargers was great. Like Joe Lombardi is still Joe Lombardi. Now he's with Sean Payton, Denver. That's a whole other topic. And some of the things when you talk about play callers and you talk about coaching and coaching decisions, it isn't just how new coaching decisions, you mentioned Baltimore and Todd Monken and more 11 personnel. It isn't just how much can the new coach or a better way of making decisions improve the outcomes, but how much were the previous coaching regime holding the team back and actually an obstacle to their success. And I think that's a tremendous lens to look at these teams through. Now, to look on the more positive side of play callers, to look on the more positive side of coaching and decision-making helping a team, I think I would just want to say, let's just have a Detroit Ben Johnson love fest here, because I continue to beat the drum, especially when I look at the personnel that they've added and the way that I think they've improved the backfield. And this is a team where if we're looking in fantasy football, often in hindsight, what matters is not a specific player, but understanding which offenses have the chance to make the pie a lot bigger. And it doesn't even matter how big the slice is for each player. When you have a bigger pie, then you want to be in. It doesn't necessarily matter that you get exactly the right Detroit line or whoever the breakout offense of the year is going to be. And Detroit was arguably one of the breakout offenses last year. I think they can take it to an entirely new level this year. I think you maybe agree with me.
Yeah, I do. Look, when I went through in the off season and I'm studying it, writing the book takes, months to do. And one of the exercises I like to look at is, just where these teams stack up visually, because I'm big in visualized data and visualized learning. And so I'm looking at all these graphics, and I'm seeing so frequently the Kansas City Chiefs are like in the upper right-hand corner of these plots that show, the best in one metric is on the x-axis, the best in the other metric is on the y-axis to the far to the top, the x-axis to the right, and the top right dot is almost always the Kansas City Chiefs. But so frequently, the Detroit Lions are right there within arm's length of the Kansas City Chiefs, and no other team is near to the Chiefs than the Detroit Lions. And it was just amazing to see the difference that some of the coaching and the play calling and the styles from Ben Johnson helped this team excel. And it wasn't just, they were just a good team and he called plays and he was very consistent and they were fine. Like, he made adjustments over the course of the season to help this team out a lot, like reduction in Jared Goff interceptions, reducing the passing target depth, trying to get more yardage after the catch. There's a lot of things that he was able to do that I think forward-thinking coaches are looking to implement. And I completely agree, especially as it relates to things like, obviously health is a big factor here, but props as it relates to Jared Goff, touchdown passes, Amon-Ra St. Brown, touchdown receptions. And these things, the numbers are basically in line or a little bit lower than what they were last season. But I see opportunity here in that you already know, probably a pretty big fantasy point was how many times St. Brown was tackled inside the 5-yard line last season. You probably know, obviously, all the rushing attempts that Jamal Williams had near the goal line and how easy it was for him to plunge in and all his touchdowns. I still think they've got a good running back stable, and they're probably going to be utilizing their backs on the ground because it is an efficient play call to spread out the defense near the goal line and to run your running back, as long as you're not doing it from jumbo and just inviting the 8th, 9th, and 10th man into the box. It is a successful strategy to run the backs near the goal line. But I feel like there was an element of, Jamal Williams is such a great guy, such a rock for our team. He's a great energy guy. We want to reward him. And there was an element of just feeding him those touchdowns. I don't think that we're going to see the running backs score as many rushing touchdowns in Detroit. I think Goff is going to get more done through the air. I think St. Brown is primed for an outstanding season. I think he is going to score more touchdowns than he did last year. I think he's going to go over his receiving touchdowns prop. But I've been extremely impressed with Ben Johnson. He's certainly going to be a hot topic name. He already is in the right circles, but over the course of this season, I think he's probably going to transition into one of the front runners for this next cycle of head coaching candidates because just what he's able to do offensively and the plays that he's able to call and just, how he's able to elevate this football team. I think he's a smart guy. I think he schemes, and I think he understands how to call plays, because there's a big difference between game planning and play calling and making adjustments. There's like 3 different elements to the whole mix. The game planning is vital. You have to come in with the right strategy. I like coaches that are developing new strategies, yes, based upon their strengths. But here's the thing, the defense knows what your strengths are. So if you come out and just utilize your strength, the defense is prepared for that. So figure out a way to attack the defense's weaknesses quite frequently through the course of a game, in addition to tweaking your strengths, using your strengths, but not overusing them, especially if you're not getting a lot of efficiency early on in the game. And then there's the element of actually calling the right plays when it's the right time to do it. I got another article on deck that I could tease as it relates to the Baltimore Ravens and the Green Bay Packers, but these were 2 teams that were average to just a little bit above or just a little bit below. In the games that Lamar was there, the Ravens were also just a little bit above, as were the Packers, in like overall offensive efficiency. But both of these teams were terrible in 2 key metrics that carry a lot of weight in terms of wins and losses, really swing the pendulum a lot. Mm-hmm. First drives of games, they were both terrible. They were not scoring points. They each scored. There was only 3 teams last year that scored 1 touchdown on the opening drive of games all season long. The Ravens and the Packers were 2 of those 3 teams. And And then down inside of the red zone, their performances inside of the red zone were horrific. And I think the new offensive coordinator, plus just like, I think it was bad variance for the Green Bay Packers last year. I think it's going to be incumbent upon their coaching staff and Matt LaFleur to call more intelligent plays on the first drive of games to try to build leads quicker, because I'm a big proponent of building leads. It allows you to dictate the rest of the game. Your whole playbook is therefore open in the fourth quarter if you have built a lead successfully and you get started doing that quickly, whereas you become much more one-dimensional in the second half if you're playing from a deficit. So building those leads and having success inside the red zone, they went from being, average to above average to like literally the worst in the NFL in those two situations. And if you're a good overall team and you're good enough to be good, rank average in offense, like you should be able to come up with a good script that's going to do no worse than be average. You should be able to be efficient down inside the red zone if you're calling the right types of plays. And Ben Johnson, he was able to get a lot out of the Detroit Lions in those regards. And I do think that these other couple of teams would stand, even though they didn't bring in an Aaron Rodgers or make massive overhauls to their roster, in simply having regression go in their favor and getting more out of the coaches from a play calling perspective.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a lot of things that I'd love that quote, by the way. There's a big difference between game planning and play calling. And the idea of just playing to your strengths is predictable, and predictable is almost never good in the NFL. Although you also mentioned adjustments. And again, one of the things I really like about reading your words about each team in between all of the great visual information, there's a ton of great visual information per team, is like you said, you can observe, okay, when the going gets tough for a team or they start having a lack of success in some aspects, what do they do, or do they do anything? I think the Cincinnati chapter was really great about, hey, they just simplified things and it works. Shotgun, 11 personnel, let Joe Burrow just take a look around and find where he wants to go with the ball. And that worked, and teams weren't really able to answer that. Now with an entire offseason, we'll see, but that's the beautiful back and forth of the NFL. And I just have to mention real quickly that if Detroit is even within shouting distance of Kansas City, and they've got Jared Goff, and Kansas City has Patrick Mahomes, what does that say about coaching? Okay, I want to go back to something you said, by the way. I meant to bring this up. You said you're a little worried about Brock Purdy. And when I see what Brock Purdy did last year, I remember the season that Nick Foles had, like 27 touchdowns to 2 interceptions under Chip Kelly, and how efficiency numbers, everything just looked like he had turned into some great quarterback. Well, I mean, except for that one postseason, he was still Nick Foles. So where does the worry about Purdy originate? What are you going to be watching to see whether that worry is well-founded once the season starts?
Yeah, it's a great question, because it's one of the best teams in the NFL. They're supposed to win the NFC West. They're favorites to, go to the divisional round, to make the conference championships. And then, they got a really good shot at making the Super Bowl based on preseason odds. But we have this big question mark at the quarterback position. We know Purdy's coming back from injury. So there's that, assuming that that's fine and that's not actually going to be a problem that's going to prevent him from starting the season or hinder him in terms of his ability to throw the football. There's still two key questions that I have. Number one is the simple fact that you look at a quarterback who comes into the NFL, and defenses oftentimes, it's why I think a lot of rookie quarterbacks starting their first game of the year do pretty well against the spread. It's because the opponents don't really know what the coach is going to do with these guys. Are they going to call short passes? Are they going to throw the ball deep? Are they going to have them use a lot of designed runs? How are they going to utilize, their protection packages? And what else are they going to try to work in there in terms of wrinkles or trick plays or simplifying things? So that first week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, defensive coordinators are on their heels, just in general. Some of them have a good track record, like Bill Belichick has a good track record going up against rookie quarterbacks. I'm not talking about rookies in general. I'm literally talking about their first start, their second start of their career. Most DCs are going to be a little bit less prepared. You then give that defensive coordinator 8 games on tape, 9 games on tape to see what the offensive play caller is trying to do with this quarterback, what his strengths and weaknesses appear to be, how over the course of, hundreds of plays now, the defenses have tried to use different coverages, where he struggles to pick things up, where he might struggle to throw the ball, what types of zones is he more comfortable attacking, where does he struggle. Every quarterback has their little idiosyncrasies that you might not be able to pick up just like in general scouting of what they did in college. But once you see them against live NFL offenses in the run of play, you are able to then devise a game plan that's going to help take away some of those things. We didn't have a chance to see that against Brock Purdy last season. If you look last season, he really didn't start very many games. Obviously, before he got injured there against the Philadelphia Eagles. But even if you're looking at like the quality of the teams that he was playing down the stretch and just how many live reps he got there, it's hard to say that this was a guy who was, really put through the fire against a bunch of defensive coordinators who had a lot of time to study film and then had game plans that could come out and try to take things away from him. We know what Kyle Shanahan's offense likes to do. It does not matter which quarterback comes through there. It is a successful system that tries to attack the same types of things. But Kyle has had varying degrees, wide outcomes with different quarterbacks that he's worked with. I mean, I've tweeted out before, you take Jimmy G in this offense and look at the record and take all the other quarterbacks that have played in this offense and look at those records, night and day different. And that doesn't mean that the scheme and the style of offense is a bad one. It just means that Jimmy G knew how to run it perfectly. Brock Purdy seems to be able to run it really well. But in actuality, once defenses have that opportunity to make those adjustments, are we still going to see Brock Purdy playing at the level that he was delivering to close out last regular season? The second thing that raises concerns is, I know you're a historian, you've been doing this podcast for eons, and you study football for generations. You understand the rise, and I actually tweeted about this last night, the ascent of job security for a quarterback who was Mr. Irrelevant 1 year ago. And now Kyle Shanahan is coming out and saying that he would have to melt in practice to lose his starting job. I mean, we really have not seen a quarterback who has gone from obviously not coveted, obviously not really a high level prospect out of college to all of a sudden, after one season in the NFL, be this guy who's completely locked into the starting quarterback role, and there's nothing there's no questions about his ability there. That seems pretty quick to me. I'm not suggesting that it's a problem or it's raising concern with regard to like Kyle Shanahan's ability to evaluate his own roster. It obviously shows that Trey Lance is highly problematic, and that was a big time error that they went after him if that's how they're perceiving Brock Purdy. But you look at Brock and you look at like that ascent. I mean, I went back and looked, like Jeff Garcia was a guy who came to mind his first year, then all of a sudden took over big time second year and was undrafted, or Kurt Warner was the same type of situation. However, with both of those guys, they were undrafted and went to other football leagues and proved themselves for years in those other leagues, and then came back, didn't play much, and all of a sudden, boom, that first season they didn't play, and the second season they're playing. We're talking Brock Purdy, a guy who was drafted, and now it's the very next year, and all of a sudden he's this locked in starter. And I think there might be some question marks about that as we head into the season. So I'm glad he gets to work with Kyle. Kyle's one of those coaches, just like Andy Reid, who makes life easy on their quarterbacks as much as possible. Kyle's going to run the ball at a higher rate than obviously Andy Reid does, but he's going to try to help take things away from Brock Purdy. They're going to throw the ball short, make these receivers work after the catch, utilize a higher run rate, have great play designs down inside the red zone. They're going to try to do everything that makes life easy on Purdy, but I just don't know if we're going to get a full season of him operating at that level like we saw at the very end of last season.
Yeah, I think that's fair just to say, kind of intuitively, you feel like, well, since we haven't seen something like this before, we should be skeptical that the next data point is just going to follow the trajectory that Brock Purdy established, and we'll see. And I think that these so many great storylines to pick up. I wanted to ask you. Someone brought it up, the Falcons chapter. It's a terrific chapter. It's definitely along with Detroit, like just one of the sunniest chapters. It's good. One of the things I love, Warren, you don't hide, when your feelings. I mean, some of the chapters might seem overly negative, or that you've decided how you felt and then you were looking for reasons for it. But it isn't like you're doing that with every team. Sometimes you just let it wash over you, and you say, well, in the case of the Falcons, and there's a few other teams, Chicago, Houston to an extent. And what I want to lead off with Atlanta, but you can go ahead and trace out the whole picture there, that I think you do it that's great, is you always mention spending. And you mentioned spending in a lot of different ways, because that's one of the big strategic elements of the NFL. And it's one of the ways where the front office and coaches, maybe you don't always see eye to eye, but when you see alignment in an organization, it gives you a good feelings. And one of the things Atlanta had to do was play with an enormous amount of dead cap last year. And as you laid out, not only were they able to be at least respectable, they were actually one of the most competitive teams in the league. And that was with some of the worst quarterback play in the league. And you bring it up in the Chicago chapter, you bring it up in the Houston chapter. And I think a lot of folks don't pause to think, if you think of the NFL like a board game, like Monopoly, and you got less money to start out that season than everybody else, how well could you compete? And some of these teams are competing with 90 million in dead cap, 70 million, 50 million. But I do think along the lines of that earlier topic of a breakout team, a breakout offense, a team that is a lot better than people expect this year, Atlanta sounds like one of your top candidates.
They are. They really are. And you're absolutely right. You're playing with, your hands tied behind your back when you're at a cap deficit. And so as I evaluate teams heading into the season, I'm always looking at kind of like, what is the strategy for this team this year? Like, what are they dealing with behind the scenes that isn't going to make the headlines, because the coach isn't going to come out and start talking about the fact that woe is me before the season even starts. Like, I can't really build a great roster. The GM's not going to come out and like state it in so many words. But the reality is, these teams, they feel this type of pressure. Talking to guys, in the building in high places, like they understood sort of when they got there what they were dealing with. And it was like, these jobs don't present themselves very often. Let's take this job, Atlanta Falcons head coach, Atlanta Falcons GM. But when you get in there and you see the cap situation that you're dealing with and how much money you owe to Matt Ryan and some of the contracts that were on the books that you didn't give to them, and the same situation could be true for like Brian Daboll and Joe Shine up in New York with the Giants and what Dave Gettleman left them with. But the Atlanta Falcons roster situation was a disaster before Arthur Smith arrived. And that's obviously the reason why other coaches get fired. In some cases, other coaches are fired due to just general incompetence. But this roster was really bad and really expensive. And it was just really poorly designed. And as a result, they had to go through some hard times. And one of those hard times was last season, where they ate $84 million in dead cap. I mean, if you look at what they had from a salary cap perspective to actually spend on their offense or spend on their defense, it paled in comparison to that third team, which was the dead cap team of players who were playing for other teams last season that they were still paying for against the cap and couldn't actually get any production out of them. So that was a big factor as I'm looking back over these teams. That one really stood out to me, especially juxtaposed against what the Atlanta Falcons have done this offseason, which isn't necessarily go out there and break the bank for a really high-priced free agent, top of the market in his position. Because that, in actuality, although you're probably going to get a slight performance bump that first year, hurts a team because free agency is shopping for the latest items that have come out, whether it's phones or whether it's some type of cars. They're not going to put those things on discount sales right now, right? Those are the things that you have to pay a premium if you want to get one of these Taylor Swift tickets, when it first comes out. Like, you're not getting these things cheap on the resale market. You have to pay that premium to get them. And that's what happens in free agency. So I like the fact that they brought in some free agents, but they weren't these big name overpriced players. Their defense is definitely built up massively compared to what it was last season. That's going to help. And in addition, yes, their defense was pretty terrible last year, but when you were an offense that wasn't scoring points, you make life very difficult on your defense in the second half of games, because that defense has no idea what to expect from the opposing offense. The opposing offense could pass the ball, run the ball. They're playing with a lead. They're playing free. They're playing easy. They're playing open. They're okay with taking an accidental delay of game penalty where that happens so they don't get themselves into a bad look. Whereas if you're the Atlanta Falcons and your offense now can have some more leads established, which is a big thing that they must do this year. I don't think their roster intuitively just allows them to have these leads. Arthur Smith is going to have to come out, just like LaFleur is going to have to do in Green Bay, just like Monk is going to have to do in Baltimore, and coach a bit more aggressively at the beginning of these games to try to build a lead, even more imperative for a team like the Falcons. So they're not in these situations in the second half and the fourth quarter where Desmond Ritter's dropping back to pass left and right and the defense knows it's coming. And because it's going to help their own defense out, send those blitzes, pin their ears back when the opposing offense is playing at a deficit in the second half of games. But the Atlanta Falcons, I mean, when I broke this chapter down without going into all the details, one of the things that really stood out to me was how efficient their run game was despite very little disguise as to what they were going to do. They lined up. The defenses knew they were going to run the ball on these first down plays. The defenses were playing with massively loaded boxes, and the Atlanta Falcons still ran right into it. And normally I would say, red light, this is a problem. I don't like coaches that are calling runs on first down that are so predictable where the defense is able to load their box. However, with the Atlanta Falcons, the one thing that kind of trumps anything that I would have to say about general beliefs in efficiency is if it works, then okay. And for the Atlanta Falcons, they were number one in the NFL in runs on first down. Despite facing all these heavy boxes, they were getting a lot of efficiency out of it. And it allowed them to open up this great play action game where they're throwing the ball down the field. The reason why I try to identify every offseason, I write about some of it more overtly in the book. I'm coming out with some articles more directly on my website. Offenses that I think will score more points. That's helpful in fantasy. Yep. It's helpful in betting. It's helpful in just being able to predict the NFL. Marcus Mariota struggled in two aspects: inside the red zone and throwing the ball deeper down the field. Anybody who owned Kyle Pitts last year understands these targets were inaccurate. He wasn't getting targeted enough, and they were not having success making some of the connections down the field, even beyond Kyle Pitts. You almost can't get worse than what Marcus Mariota was doing last season. So Desmond Ridder should be able to provide some upside with his ability to throw the ball down the field. That ability will do two things. Number one, might actually score some points on those plays, right? They might actually have, lo and behold, a 30-yard touchdown pass. I want to say, I looked up the numbers as I was talking to some of the guys down there in the organization, but I think they had 7 touchdown passes that were 5 or more yards in the air. Yeah. 7, the lowest of any team in the NFL. Right. So maybe they'll score a 20-yard touchdown pass or a 30 on some of these deep passes. And if they don't, then they're getting down into the red zone. And I think that they're going to have some more success inside of the red zone. The reason I believe that is because Arthur Smith knows how to call red zone plays. I am not expecting LaFleur and the Green Bay Packers to suddenly have a great red zone offense if every year that he's called plays in Green Bay, he didn't know how to design things in the red zone. He wasn't getting guys open. He wasn't having a lot of success. But the Green Bay Packers had some outstanding success down inside of the red zone under LaFleur. I know he's capable of calling these plays. They can make some tweaks and focus on it. It's the same exact belief I have with Arthur Smith. In Tennessee, yes, I know you have Derrick Henry, but you were having the number one most efficient red zone offense, and it was the most efficient passing offense down inside the red zone. That was with Ryan Tannehill. So, I think that you're going to get more success out of the passing attack down inside the red zone as well as the rushing attack. I think the Falcons are going to be scoring more points. As a result, I think that this team has the opportunity to take off. Now, how would I, if I'm trying to draft for fantasy, which is your world, divvy up where these targets are going or divvy up who's getting the carries out of the backfield? That's a much more difficult question to ask. And I'm thankful I don't have to answer that question. I can instead rely upon the fact that I want to be betting the Atlanta Falcons to exceed 8 wins, which I did. I want to be betting on the long shot upside that the Atlanta Falcons will go to the playoffs at plus money. I want to bet on the fact that I think maybe Desmond Ridder throws, I want to say it's over 14 and a half touchdowns, something along those lines, because Marcus Mariota exceeded that number last season, and he only played 13 games, and he was terrible in the red zone and couldn't throw the ball deep down the field. So I absolutely believe that we're going to see Desmond Ridder eclipse that number as long as he doesn't get hurt. Or I guess there's always the question that we might see a backup quarterback come and take over because Desmond Ridder wasn't a highly drafted quarterback. And if he struggles, I do believe that Arthur Smith is semi on the hot seat. But right now, I think the team in the direction is a full buy-in on Desmond Ridder. I know early in camp there was some highlights that were not very flattering about Desmond Ridder's accuracy. And I'm just looking forward to seeing him in some of these games the second and third week and just how he performs. I know they held him out of the first preseason game. I'm really excited to see what he does as he gets a couple of reps here against some of the other teams' number ones.
Yeah, like you said about Arthur Smith, it was predictable. But if Marcus Mariota was your quarterback, you would have run on first down all the time too. Right. And the fact that they were successful, I think it just shows that it's a well-coached team that has bought in. I think it's a team that, and I think whatever they're going to do, whatever wrinkles they're going to unfold. And like you said, it couldn't be worse than Marcus Mariota. Arthur Smith indicated he understood that because they went from, I think, 23 to 28 pass attempts after they went to Ridder. So he's even showing you with his decisions, I trust this quarterback more. It's exciting. I think Falcons fans should be excited. And like you called it a long shot, they make the playoffs. But really, if you look at Carolina and Tampa, it's really about Atlanta and New Orleans, like always. And it doesn't make it seem like such a long shot. But yeah, Arthur Smith and the Falcons as the breakout team of 2023 is definitely believable. I wanted to ask you one more thing before we go. Last 10 minutes, we just kind of go wherever off the rails. But I want to ask you about schedule strength, because schedule strength in fantasy football is one of those things that a lot of folks say, hey, if you're backwards looking with schedule strength, then a lot of the data, a lot of the assumptions you make are just going to be wrong, because it's not going to be the same as last year. And I know from your analysis of each team that you are forward looking, that you are trying to look at what are teams going to learn from last year, or when they have new play callers or new coaches, what do we know about those coaches? Or when we look at personnel moves they made, what does that show us about their plans? And also I want to take a quick moment out to say, and really signal to Goose this, because you're about as immersed in this as anybody that I've ever talked to. And you're saying, hey, there are things you can learn from the preseason. Pay attention to the preseason. Just because there are some folks in preseason, who cares about preseason? There's a lot you can learn from the preseason, including things that may inform as you start to project schedule strength. So how do you, because I know in a lot of your previews, you'll appeal to schedule strength and you'll appeal to a change in schedule strength. This team's going to have a lot harder schedule than last year. This team's going to have a lot easier schedule than last year. And I do think one thing that we can do reliably with schedule strength is we already know what the teams were like last year. So we can look back and say, well, or I love it when you say, here's the list of quarterbacks this team beat. You know, like let's actually, are these quality wins, right? Are these things that are going to say sticky year over year? Schedule strength can help us. But what about when you project schedule strength going forward? How do you use what you suspect or the possibility of change to inform your projection of schedule strength?
It's a great question. I do believe that schedule strength as well as rest edges, which is something I talk about but won't dive into a lot right now, are underutilized within, maybe it's the fantasy community, but certainly the betting community. I don't think it's factored in enough to the lines. That's okay, because that gives us the opportunity to do just that and get an edge. But the key is you have your projections entering the season, and the real place that you want to look at as it relates to something like strength of schedule or rest edge is at the outliers, right? The teams that are really either moving from a really hard schedule to a really easy schedule, vice versa. A team that's, got top 2, 3, 5 easiest schedule, a team that's got the bottom 2, 3, 5 hardest schedule. Those are things that should ring alarm bells. If you go from the 13th easiest schedule to the 18th easiest schedule, you should not really look too deeply into something along those lines, in my opinion, because it's just not going to carry enough weight, because there is this margin of error with regard to your ability to accurately forecast what those other teams are going to do this upcoming season. The way that you can really take advantage of it, if you understand that we're mainly before the season starts, we're factoring it into our analysis to a degree. We're focusing on the outliers. The other way is then during the season, this is where it really helps. And that is being able to incorporate strength of schedule to your week-to-week analysis, especially once we have enough data that you feel like we can rely somewhat comfortably on that data. The NFL is inherently a small sample sport. And a lot of people disagree with me in the community. They think that sometimes I'll rely on too little sample sets. But, the only thing I could say to that is, like, imagine that you're helping a team prepare a game plan for week 2 or week 3 of the season. And you have to prepare that game plan on like 1 week or 2 weeks of data from the other team. Are you going to go and tell that coach in terms of what you think he can do to attack the weaknesses of that defense that you didn't look at all at the first couple of games that defense played, and you're instead going to focus on what they did last year? You have to be able to weave in some elements of small sample sizes into the NFL because it inherently is a small sample sport. Depending upon how you're looking at things, like, you're going to have to ultimately get to sample sizes that might not be worth analyzing in other fields, in other sports, in other walks of life, but you're going to have to do it in some regard with the NFL. And so I think that, after several weeks, you look at a team and you look at what their efficiencies are. And what I like to look at, again, is those times when something has changed, where a team over the first 3 weeks has ended up playing like 3 top 10 run defenses. And now they're going up against a team that so far on the season, after the first 3 weeks, ranks like 28th. And that team ranks 28th in run defense. And they really have played like a mediocre level of schedule themselves this year of rushing offenses. Now I'm going to say that your run offense is going to have a great opportunity in this game to have success because you're moving from top 10 run defenses for 3 straight games to now a team that's bottom 10 in terms of run defenses. So there's a lot of elements for me that I like to factor in strength of schedule because I believe that it matters. In addition to focusing on the big picture strength of schedule, such as like overall team strength, which can help in your ability to determine whether or not that team might be winning that game or losing that game. And if they're winning that game, as you factor in, the point spread potentially, and then the strength of schedule of that opponent, might you be winning this game? That's going to help dictate a lot from probably like a DFS perspective, like whether I want to start this running back because he's going to have more opportunity, he's going to have less opportunity, especially in the second half of these games. But I also will look at it from like strength of offensive line or strength of, like you point out, like opposing quarterback, or I get into like the nitty gritty details, which I love, which is why, like, when it gets time for the Super Bowl is actually how I first got noticed, like several years, like more than a handful of years ago, by a team writing these like really detailed reports on the Super Bowl. But when I get to that point in time, like, I know how many defenses that you have played that use certain types of zone coverage, and whether or not you played good defenses that use zone coverage or bad defenses that use zone coverage, and the specific types of coverages, and whether or not your quarterback was good against it, bad against it, what we're going to expect this game. Like, there's so many other things that we can look up besides big picture strength of schedule that are going to help. And I love to look at those spots and attack those spots where I identify something that's a big change year to year. And, if we talk specifics, like the New York Giants are a team this year that I certainly have questions about, because in large part due to their strength of schedule. They have and if you look at the Giants chapter, and by the way, Sig, I just want to get this out there to people that if you go to sharp.football and put in the code couch, because I'm doing this with you. So we actually ran this in Joe Bryant, your partner over there. We put it in your newsletter last week. It was a different coupon code, but it's the same deal. You'll get the book for only $10. You've got like less than 4 weeks before the season. That's like takes it 70% off or more of what we're selling it for on the website. $10. You can get, it's over 500 pages, chapter on each team. But if you go to the Giants chapter, it definitely showcases the fact that just across the board on offense, whether you're looking at passing offense or rushing offense, the more difficult schedule that the New York Giants offense is going to face this year. And I certainly do not believe that they're going to be able to make as many second half comebacks. They weren't the Minnesota Vikings last year in terms of winning so many one-score games and making all these comebacks in the fourth quarter. but they were a step down from that and close. They were a team that really relied on being able to come back in games, win these close one-score games by having good second halves. I do not believe against these stepped up defenses that they're going to face, they're going to have those opportunities. So this is a team that's going to have to come out and start games much faster this year. And it's going to be a challenge because they're going to be doing that against much more difficult defenses, whether it's pass defenses, pass rushes, run defenses. Like, this is a team that is facing top 5 defenses across the board, and it's going to be a challenge for them. So I love strength of schedule. I love rest edges. I love talking about it. The key is, just like anything, though, that we do, Sig, you do not want to put all your eggs in one basket. You do not want to say, well, I like the Giants under just because they play a tough schedule.
Right.
Because that is absolutely not the forefront of why you should be betting on something like the Giants under. But it is a piece of that puzzle. It's probably not a 10-piece puzzle, but it's like a 15-piece puzzle, 20-piece puzzle, but it's a piece of that puzzle. It's an important factor. If you're not looking at it, you're going to be at a disadvantage, but you want to be careful about how you implement it. There's as much art to it, in my opinion, as there is science as it relates to something like strength of schedule.
Yeah, and like you said, one of the key points is we become more informed as the season goes on, and we can understand how to use this going forward, and we use it to prepare ourselves. Storyline for the Giants: if they struggle, well, who are they struggling against? Are these teams that they didn't have to play last year? I love how you said too, with putting context around a team's performance against zone coverage. Well, were they playing good or bad zone defenses? It doesn't necessarily mean if they're excelling that you just they're really good against zone. It might be that they played bad defenses, and those defenses have to play zone. All right, just a couple of minutes. There's so much. Again, sharp.football. The code is couch. $10 for this is like basically giving it away for free when you look at the amount of information. And much like I say about Matt Waldman's RSP, just getting into the head of Warren Sharp and how he thinks about football is going to make you smarter. And there's a lot of good fantasy analysis in there from Rich and Ray and the team there too. All right, I got to ask, in our small off the rail segment here, Warren, what makes a shirt speak to you when you're shopping and the shirt calls out your name and it's going to be one you take home with you?
Yeah, I unfortunately, just due to my schedule, I do most of that shopping online, and so it's a lot of like flipping the finger on different apps, just like flying through things, and yeah, it'll pop out. I do tend to go for a little bit more bold colors. I like to interject a little bit of levity. It's such a dry world, especially dealing with numbers and sitting in this office all day long, and just like very little light of day. It's nice to actually, like, when you look down or you see a video playing of you, that there's some color interjected there, and there's some levity. And of course, I'm still. Will I be rocking this shirt in November, December? No, right? Because I live on the East Coast. It gets cold as hell, and it's even more dreary. But I love, once I finish writing the book, to go on a nice vacation. I spend a lot of time trying to relax and decompress and just get that time in with the kids and the family that I'm definitely not going to have in that same context during the course of the season. And so we go to the beach and relax. And this is what I'm wearing, just a little button-up shirt that's easy to take off, go jump in the beach or the pool, and then just put it on. Then you can go grab dinner or whatever, and it's not really something you have to worry about too much. So I just like colors and something that's a little bit different as opposed to kind of the same old standard.
That's great. I love levity. First of all, why so serious? Let's lighten up a little bit. I mean, we're just talking about football here. And I have always been fond of saying, Warren, like, I just want to jog people out of their trance a little bit in some way. It's a black and white world, and that color, even if just for a moment, it startles someone, it gets their attention, and it makes them smile, or at least brings them down into the moment and being present. It's a good thing. And it's a great, you used the word juxtaposition earlier. It's a great juxtaposition to the analysis, which it's not so much your analysis is serious. It's just very precise, very detail oriented. And although a lot of times the way you tell the story will include levity or emotion, it's still weighty. And we need to lighten that up. And this is awesome. And we're all so fired up for the season to start. We're fired up for more, like you said, more information from the preseason games coming up. And the Sharp football review, 2023 football review it's just an essential, folks. So yeah, sharp.football couch. Warren, it's been too long. I look forward to us being able to do this again in the future. And just this is all stuff that enriches our understanding of football and helps us enjoy it more. And that's what it's all about, because we want to serve everybody out there. They're the best audience we could ever ask for, because they're so classy.